director for Spanish language television station KMEX here in Los Angeles and a columnist. Killed by a tear gas projectile August 29th.
Ruben Salazar was a well-known journalist working for the LA Times when he was shot and killed by a LA sheriff's deputy back in 1970. He was also considered a trailblazer. Salazar was one of the few Latino journalists working for a major publication at the time. And there's a new documentary about Salazar screening tonight in San Francisco. And joining me to talk about that is Katinka Martinez with San Francisco State. She's a colleague there to talk about the screening and the man behind the screening. And tell us a little bit about the area in Los Angeles and in the country and what the context of this history and the shooting was.
So Ruben Salazar was a journalist who worked for the Los Angeles Times. Actually, prior to working there, he worked in San Francisco and Santa Rosa. So he was a journalist who was a foreign correspondent in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, in the Dominican Republic during the U.S. occupation of the Dominican Republic, and he covered Mexico City during the student uprisings. Later in 1969, he covered the Chicano community, the Mexican-American community in Los Angeles that was rising up for demanding civil rights and fighting against the war in Vietnam and the disproportionate numbers of Mexican-Americans serving in that war. So Ruben Salazar was covering one of many protests that was organized against the Vietnam War. And at that protest, he took a step away from all of the demonstrations, went into a bar to relax, have a drink with his work colleagues, and while he was in there, a sheriff's officer came in, shot a tear gas canister into the bar, and the tear gas canister went directly through his head, killing him immediately. This really sparked an uprising in the community, because for so long Salazar had been reporting for the Los Angeles Times and speaking to the broad audience about what was going on in the Mexican-American neighborhoods, and really kind of translating and the sentiment and the frustrations of Mexican-Americans who felt that the police was targeting them, that educators weren't really respecting them or respecting their children. And then he was also a news director for the Spanish language
KMEX
television.
in Los Angeles,
right, so he was speaking to two audiences, and to have his voice silenced was very tragic for the community.
And for a time in the trial that came out, in the investigation that came later, there was suspicion that he was targeted by the sheriff's office.
Yeah, he was actually writing an investigative piece on the sheriff's department and possible corruption at the time that he was killed.
And what came out of the trial? What was the outcome?
Unfortunately, there was a coroner's inquest that was supposed to determine the reason why he was killed, and that inquest ended up in a hung jury, and there was never any strict conclusion as to why Salazar was killed. So we don't have any answers.
So in journalism, and certainly among the Latino community, Ruben Salazar is seen as a hero, isn't he?
He is, which is a bit ironic, because when he was writing, he was very much committed to the concept of objectivity, and he didn't want to be referred to as a quote-unquote Chicano journalist or a Mexican-American journalist. He said, I'm a journalist first and foremost, and maybe I'm Chicano second, right? So some people, some activists were questioned that. They didn't understand that. But I think what he wanted to make sure was that the Chicano community, the Mexican-American community, was taken seriously. And he knew he had to use the framework of objectivity to accomplish that.
Is that dichotomy with his career and his ethnicity kind of where the title Man in the Middle came from?
Exactly, exactly. The title of the film is Ruben Salazar, Man in the Middle, because he did really kind of border, he went back and forth between these two worlds, right? And once he did have a column in the Los Angeles Times, he was able to move a little bit away from that objectivity that he stuck to in the beginning of his career. But for so long, he was just kind of, you know, balanced sources and very much committed to objectivity.
Speaking about objectivity and a voice for the Latino community, this event tonight is a benefit for El Tecolote.
It is. So El Tecolote is a bilingual, bi-weekly newspaper that circulates throughout San Francisco and the East Bay also. And it originally was created out of a class in San Francisco State University. It was a journalism class that was trying to get more Latinos into the newsrooms, right? So in 1970, the newspaper was started, and it's actually the longest running bilingual newspaper. We have 10,000 copies that are distributed for free throughout the Bay Area.
And for those people who are interested in attending tonight's event, what time and where?
So tonight's event will be at the Roxy Theater in San Francisco at 7 p.m. and they can buy tickets at the door, or they can go to the Roxy Theater's website and buy tickets there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for telling our audience a little bit about Salazar, who he was and how important he was, and also about tonight's event.
Thank
Great to see you. And we'll be right back.